Well lads, after that party I just thought, I'm gonna take a little bit of time off to myself, spend a day to recover. So I thought, sure look, I'll order a bit of food. I decided to just go for a curry, nothing fancy, just really in the mood for one. They forgot my drink. Doesn't matter. You know when a restaurant messes up your order, but it's not something massive like giving you something you ask them to remove because you're allergic to it or anything, so you just decide to deal with it because you don't really want to bother the staff since it's a busy day, and it's just a small mistake that any human could make, and realistically you're not going to explode because they forgot to give you your Fanta. Now when the multi-billion-dollar video game corporation makes that small mistake, then I'll bite. Doesn't mean I should. Stadium, Overwatch's newest mode, has been out for a few weeks, and I have to say it's been a massive success. Taking the core Overwatch gameplay, adding a new twist of items and powers to create new ways that characters can be played. Reinhardt can become a full-fledged dive tank, Soldier can become Pharah at home, and Ana can just ditch her scope entirely and become the best battle granny you've ever seen. Stadium is some of the most fun that I have had in Overwatch 2. It's caused me to start cackling like a hyena far more often than any other game I've played recently aside from Bat. But despite how much I am loving it, I can't help but feel something is missing. Well, I'm not trying to say that the mode is unfinished or anything of that sort. They aren't pulling a Nintendo and releasing an unfinished product with free updates down the line. Stadium is in a complete state currently. This is a full-fledged mode. But like I said, there's just something missing from it. But before I start my moaning, I do have some praises that I need to give to us. Starting with the obvious thing, powers. They function like more powerful versions of current day perks, giving you up to 4 changes to your gameplay, ranging from things like stacking attack speed while you attack enemies, to honestly becoming an AoE. Powers also give an excuse for a lot of fan favorite ability suggestions to appear. Seen already with perks, we've got stuff like Ana and Juno who are allowed to crit enemies now, though a new addition has been made to crit allies as well. Lucio has his beloved Goomba Stomp, Orisa Shield and Bongo have returned yet again, though I would have preferred Halt, but I digress. And these powers also pave the way for other abilities to return as well. Characters that may be added in future, such as Bastion, could have old abilities come back, such as Tank Form or even the original Sentry mode. And even the new powers are insanely fun. My personal favourite of all of them is Mei and her Ice Ball. Letting you roll around and bully people who can't even do anything about it has no right to be as funny as it is, especially if you just go all in on ability power to the point where you just become a rolling ball of damage, crushing everything in your path. In case it wasn't obvious already, I'm quite the fan of when games give players control over the direction they want to take their characters. Whether it's classes and subclasses in Baldur's Gate 3 or any RPG for that matter, or just universal items in MOBAs like League or even roguelikes such as Bat and Hades. But Overwatch and Stadium did something brilliant, something that you rarely see in any game or mode that houses some sort of item building focus. I do love Paladins alongside its shop and talents and never even considered something like this to be possible, but Stadium will let you purchase character-specific effects and items, something I absolutely adore. These won't be quite as significant as powers. A lot of them consist of simple changes, extending ability durations being one of the most common, but there are several unique effects across the shop. The easiest one to point at and see how notable these extra effects can be is Reinhardt's purple tier item Griffin Glider, allowing him to fly during charge. These character-specific items are littered throughout the cast in the blue and purple tiers, emphasis on littered. They are not given out evenly, and honestly I can barely notice a pattern between them. D.Va has 14 of these items, with 7 of them being located in survival, meanwhile Ashe has 13 and only 3 located in survival, and then there's poor Al Soldier with only 7 of these items, but at the same time he does not deserve any more, which I'll return to in a while. I would like to see some more at least evenly spread across the cast, since the average across the current 17 characters is 11 hero-specific items, but it's not like a lack of these items sours the experience. I just think it would be a lot more interesting to have more. And on the topic of more, I'm going to return to powers for a moment. Every character gets 12 powers, with up to 4 being available in a match. All lovely except for one small detail. Mercy and Genji only have 11. Now if anything, what bothers me more is just the gap the two of them have on the power screen, but I would really like it if 12 powers were standardized across the cast. Something in my memory tells me that on the first day Genji had 12 powers, but I think I'm horrendously misremembering. Regardless, the hero specific items being pretty uneven isn't really a pain point whatsoever, but the powers don't get this benefit. A lot of powers are designed with a little bit of synergy in mind. Sticking on Genji because I've played him the most, blading at the end of a deflect can combine with his other power to shoot projectiles from blade to give a surprise ranged finisher to your deflect. So being down 1 power total to the rest of the cast, while not something that would destroy Genji or Mercy's ability to perform in these games, it does slightly hinder the player, or better put, it takes control away from them in the item building process. Even just giving Genji something basic like blade kills resetting deflect's cooldown could have insane synergy, and creating deflect chains with proper timing could be really fun. Because the build potential in Stadium is by far where I've derived the most enjoyment from it, even with the smaller cast, and trust me, I'm gonna get back to ye feckers. The variety that different builds give, not even game to game, but round to round, is what makes me love items and build systems in this mode, which is why I want to see an even power count across everyone. And since there is no cost whatsoever to selling items, you can try a full ability power build for a round, but then realize you're not a big fan of how it plays, or maybe it's just not a good matchup into the enemy and their builds. You can change it up with no repercussions whatsoever. Or my preferred way to use this mechanic is offsetting scaling weaknesses. Ability power builds tend to be a bit weaker early in the game, especially if you're on a character without much ability damage like Reaper, so you can spend the early rounds focusing on more weapon damage, or even investing slightly in survivability, only to change it up later in the game by bringing out full ability power and turning Death Blossom into an express trip back to spawn with 5 free tickets. And sticking with Reaper, say you went the other way and went for full weapon damage. Your ultimate, which requires ability power, will start to become your own express trip back to spawn, especially with how little damage it'll do in later rounds due to the global health increase everyone receives when buying items, which is what actually gives your builds a bit more power. A more even spread of items will keep up across the board, though investing fully in just one stat will make that element of your gameplay very powerful even against the increased health pools. But whatever you aren't investing in starts to naturally lose out. It's a bit awkward to put into words, but I do like how it plays out and forces a little more thought to be put into the item builds, though I can also see how it would be something that people could dislike. So more items that encourage mixed builds could be very welcome, and I do have a pain point with builds, but that's something I'll come back to. Returning to that Reaper example, a full weapon build makes your ultimate pretty pointless, so you may as well invest in the item that rewards you for sitting at full ult charge with a big stat boost across the board. It's similar to those mixed build options, though it's not quite what I meant when bringing them up. The ability and weapon power split is quite the double-edged sword. It can be viewed as both something that enhances the creativity of building by creating new playstyles, or it can be viewed as something that hinders that same creativity as it takes usefulness away from a massive chunk of your hero kit. It really comes down to whatever you prefer. Either way, the only real complaint I can have about Stadium and its item building in concept is that the buying phase can be a little bit long at times. Now there is this inbuilt ready system where if you close out of the armory, you're deemed ready, and if all players are, the timer finishes, but I just really like a visual indicator of this ready status to make things clearer. The push and pull added in through builds is nothing new to gaming as a whole, but within Overwatch, I'm really loving what Stadium brings. Doesn't mean I've forgotten what it hasn't though. So there's an even more notable aspect of Stadium that I probably should have mentioned first, well before the item building, being the perspective. Third person is an option in Stadium, which is really cool. I don't like it. Not to say that I dislike the game taking a third person perspective, but rather I'm not a big fan of its implementation. Personally, on at least a couple characters, I find third person to be a little bit jarring, and I also find aiming in it to just be strange. And if you're playing Ana or Ashe, swapping from third person to scoped in first person is such an off-putting experience. It feels so strange. I do really like the choice you're given. Being able to select what perspective you want is lovely, since there are both pros and cons, and even giving a keybind to select what shoulder you view over is really nice in case you need to switch mid-fight. But this is where my other issue pops up. You can't swap between these perspectives on the fly, and while I'm no expert considering there are already multiple abilities in base Overwatch and powers that will swap you from first to third person in the first place, I don't think adding a keybind to allow you to switch from these perspectives would be mind-breakingly difficult to implement, especially considering you can already swap perspectives mid-game, you just need to go into the settings to do it. And while I'm on this, I'm not the biggest fan of the horizontal offset of the camera. Currently, if you're in close range of a tall character and want to aim up slightly to hit some headshots, you'll feel your camera grind against the floor, which just feels off. and it gets even worse if you're trying to hit the Mercy who's bouncing around the skybox during teamfights. And this awkwardness of aiming upwards will only get worse when we see characters like Echo and Pharah added in future, characters who spend a lot of time above the ground during gameplay, who you may end up unable to see properly with your character also blocking your view as you look upwards. The horizontal offset is also why aiming feels a little bit off, because depending on which shoulder you're currently looking over, the amount your mouse needs to move left or right is different, creating this fecked up sensitivity illusion, where what would normally have been far enough left to what you're used to actually ends up being shorter. A vertical offset, one which just places the character in the center, would, in theory at the very least, since testing is important, fix these issues. Aiming upwards becomes less awkward with your character not getting in the way of your view as badly. The sensitivity illusion now exists vertically instead of horizontally, but that's far less of an issue with every Overwatch character being taller than they are wide. With how much more hectic Stadium is compared to normal gameplay, I really do feel lost at certain moments playing in first person, since third person offers so much more information. And for Reinhardt, this centered offset that I'm talking about already exists, so it's clearly possible. I'm not implying that the current third person needs to be axed and replaced. I've already made it clear that I love how much choice we're being given. From choosing our own perspective down to which shoulder we look over, this stuff is really important. But just a little more would be lovely, because if every character had the same camera as Reinhardt, I'd probably be a much bigger fan of the third person camera. As it currently is, I'm getting a little bit more used to the offset, which makes it annoy me less, but whenever I'm playing Ana, I just cannot deal with that third person camera. My problems with the perspective aside, I really do like the clear indication that the game gives you with this highly saturated X mark when your third person shot will be blocked by a wall, which is an issue I had with a certain other hero shooter that I'm not going to mention for my own safety. This one piece of clarity goes a long way. Another piece of Stadium that I have to praise is the heroes, though this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the fact that the full cast isn't included is great for a lot of reasons, one of the most obvious being a slight rebalance of the role population. With Overwatch's previous 4 categories being brought down to 3, and combining offense and defense to create the damage role, there's an obvious skew in the role count, with DPS having by far the most characters. So with Stadium releasing with a limited selection, it does allow this disparity to go away, and for that, I do have to commend it. The limited selection is also nothing new to Overwatch modes, and having the promise of more characters joining every season creates easy longevity for the mode. However, the hero selection. While it can be said that there's nothing wrong with it, it can be described as unfair at the very least. Of the 3 characters who could be considered the faces of Overwatch and its roles in Winston, Tracer, and Mercy, only one of them is present. Now honestly, I have no problem with the selection of tanks. I would really like Winston to be there, but it's grand really. Now the other roles don't get this lenience. Starting with support, realistically I also have no major problems with it, but why do we have Juno and Kiriko here? I know they're extremely popular and that is why they're here, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't want Zen or Brig to make an appearance over Juno, at least considering how long they've been around. And the DPS. Half of the DPS cast available in Stadium is hitscan. 4 on a technicality if we're gonna include Reaper, but that is beyond a technicality. I'm talking about the long range offenders here. I'll say it bluntly, and I also need to be clear how biased I am on this, but this is just outright boring. Tracer, Bastion, Torb, Echo, Venture all would have been so much more interesting than just guy with a gun, girl with a gun, gay with a gun. I know I'm being unfair on this because I enjoy hitscan far less than flex DPS in Overwatch, just because they all fulfill the function of a random Call of Duty weapon, but honestly, I'm gonna stand by it. I think Tracer should be included instead of Soldier at a minimum. Half the DPS cast being long-range hitscan just gives the role so much less variety compared to the others, which is a sentence I thought I would never say when talking about DPS of all things. Now, like I mentioned, new heroes are being added in future seasons, so these current issues are short-lived. Season 17 will see Sigma, Junkrat, and Zenyatta, and Season 18 will have Winston, Brig, and Sojourn. I think they're genuinely aiming for a 50-50 split on the DPS category. I'm actually quite a fan of Sojourn as well, I just want characters other than long-range hitscans to be available. While my current problems with the Stadium cast will be addressed in future, it doesn't change the fact that I'm still not the biggest fan of it currently. It doesn't ruin the mode or anything of that sort, but if I have to play one more game of Cassidy Soldier, I may as well just hop on Apex for the same experience. A cool new addition to Stadium I need to mention as well is actually the maps. Each round is designed to be quick, and the maps reflect this. There's only one single round of control point. The push bot final location is barely a third of the original maps, and Clash is first to 2 points, which is actually really fun. And the new stadium specific maps are lovely additions as well. I love the style on them. But there are only 9 maps available for the 7 rounds, which can just get a little bit repetitive over time. Currently it's completely offset by the fact that the mode is still new and we have all these build varieties for every character to create different experiences each game. But over time, this lack of variety in the where will start to show, and the where is the most important part of any game that features differing locations for its gameplay. An easy fix can be found in simply increasing the amount of control maps available, at the very least expanding Nepal and Ilios to the full versions rather than strictly keeping us to Shrine and Ruins. Now new maps are on the horizon. Season 17 will give us Esperanza and Samoa, and we won't even be restricted to just previous maps. New potentially stadium specific modes such as Payload Race are coming in Season 18, so just like Heroes, this is only temporary, but it's still worth mentioning either way. Stadium as it currently stands is incredibly fun. I have been loving it, but it's just been having its fair share of growing pains. I mean, some powers were just outright busted on launch, like Soldier's ult triggering on rockets, so the typical balance issues you expect in any game were at play, but the team behind them is fast to fix it. Sort of. I do have to mention these because there are certain perks and characters that are just not the most fun things in the world to deal with. I mean, the biggest offender by far is Soldier. Even without looking at his ult triggering for half a second when using rockets, which just encourages Soldier players to throw out rockets anywhere to confirm a kill instead of actually aiming them, I have genuinely seen soldiers throw out rockets onto the ground just to get the auto-aim to finish off whoever they're currently fighting. And Soldier also has by far one of the strongest powers in stacking damage on continuous shots fired. The first game of Soldier that I played was by far the easiest match of Stadium I've ever experienced. Which is a shame because the focus on primary fire powers for Soldier takes away from one of my personal favorite builds on him with his rocket jumps, which is so stupidly funny to use as a way to bounce around the objective. And while I was mentioning how I enjoy the push and pull building creates, in reality that doesn't apply to everyone. Once again, I'm returning to Reaper. He has 3 abilities including his ultimate, so naturally ability power should affect all 3, right? It doesn't. All ability power does for Reaper is increase ultimate damage. There's nothing wrong with skewing characters towards certain builds if their kit naturally pushes them that way. I mean, Soldier and Reaper are just obvious choices for full weapon power builds, but if anything, shouldn't that increase the need to add silly ability power interactions for them? Imagine if Wraith or sprint speed was affected by ability power, or if Reaper's teleport range or the speed of it got increased with ability power. And honestly, this goes across the board. Weapon power just being an increase to weapon damage is completely fine and makes complete sense. And with weapon power, weapon lifesteal, and attack speed being valid choices that will just have more frequent use than ability power, for a lot of characters, it's the go-to. Ability power should really have more power to it, some kind of ability altering effects, because while you have characters like Reaper, who can take ability power but get pretty low benefits, you also have Mercy, with absolutely no use for ability power. Sure, 2 powers can be gotten on Mercy, which gives ability power use in her kit, but that means ability power can't be at its most effective on Mercy until you're at least 3 rounds in. Why not have res cast time decrease with ability power? Or have GA range or even its meter jump boost power increase with it as well. While the build potential as a whole is really fun when you're playing with characters with abilities that have easy numeric functions to work with, like Orisa, where her ability power can affect her ability damage and fortify bonus HP. Weapon power naturally affects her weapon, and survivability turns into a raid boss. But when you're on Kiriko, Reaper, and obviously Mercy, and ability power is just affecting only one or no aspects of your kit, the item builds just don't offer the same level of freedom as they do on characters like Genji, Lucio, and Junker Queen. Again, it doesn't completely ruin the mode, honestly it barely gets close to it, but it's not something to be ignored either. To finish off, Stadium is also quite demanding, and early on, even with my fairly powerful PC, I was having issues with frame drops, but these have been sorted in a hotfix, and if you're on a lower end piece of hardware, optimizations are still on the way. Which also leads me to something else about Stadium I do not see enough people talking about. A new team is working on this. Stadium isn't being handled by our usual Overwatch team. There's a specific Stadium team for it, meaning new content on the regular for Overwatch and new content for Stadium aren't going to hinder one another. One won't be prioritized over the other and cause month-long to even year-long content droughts that a certain PvE attempt caused. So if you like only one of these modes, you don't need to be worried about the other taking away from development time from the one you prefer. This is a genius play by the devs to get the extra help a mode this demanding requires, and I'm really happy they took this route after learning what one team working on 2 projects can end up doing to them. Stadium is an incredible addition to Overwatch. I mean, honestly, ever since the release of Venture last year, the game has been on an insane upswing. And even though, yes, I do have my problems with it, it's been communicated that they're being addressed, and even then, the issues that I have aren't something that completely destroy the experience. It just takes Stadium from being a 10 out of 10 down to a 9. In the modern gaming landscape, with games being released in unfinished, unpolished, and unfun states, is Soldier 76 using aimbot every 8 seconds really the worst thing to happen since canned bread? You know, if anything it isn't, because now Sojourn's doing it too. Hi. I'm not doing anything of note, pups. This isn't... I'm not... Lads. Lads, I'm not... There's nothing that interesting happening here. I'm not going outside. I just need to... Hi. There's a fucking bottle of Kopparberg out there, puppies. That's not really... It's nothing that would really interest you. You don't drink as far as I'm aware.